Canada is 159 years old. That is the country. The paperwork. Confederation, 1867. But there are people standing in line at a Tim Hortons right now whose surnames have been spoken on this land for more than 400 years. Names that were being written in parish registers on the St. Lawrence 2.5 centuries before Canada legally existed. Names that crossed on wooden ships, survived winters that killed half the people who carried them, and then simply refused to leave. This video counts down the 15 oldest surnames still in use in Canada today. And I will tell you now, the list does not look the way most people expect. The oldest English names in Canada are not in Ontario. The most common surname in an entire province traces back, almost impossibly, to a single married couple. And the number one name on this list belongs to the first family that ever farmed Canadian soil, a family whose descendants are alive and voting and complaining about the weather right now. 3 stops to watch for. Number 5 is a name that is written across the most famous battlefield in Canadian history, and almost nobody realizes it is a surname at all. Number 2 is the single most common old surname in the country, and the story of where it comes from is the best argument you will ever hear that history is just families stacked up. And halfway through, I will stop the countdown entirely to tell you about roughly 770 women. Because without them, most of the names in this video and most of the people watching it in Quebec would not exist. Along the way, I will also show you the strange old system that gave thousands of Canadian families 2 surnames at once, and why your cousins might be carrying the other one without either of you knowing it. One honest note before we begin, because this channel deals in real history. The naming traditions of the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis are older than every name on this list, older than the ships, older than all of it. But they worked differently, passed differently, and deserve their own telling. Tonight's list is about hereditary surnames, the kind that arrived with the boats, and the question tonight is simple: which of them got here first, and which are still here? Number 15, Fraser. We start with the youngest name on this list, and it is still older than the country by more than a century. In 1759, the 78th Fraser Highlanders, a Scottish regiment, fought on the Plains of Abraham. When the war ended, something unusual happened. Many of them did not go home. They were offered land, they married French-Canadian women, and they stayed. Kilts folding into farm coats along the St. Lawrence. Fraser became one of the first Scottish names to put down permanent Canadian roots, and it spread from Quebec to every province that came after. And the name did not stop at farms. A generation later, a fur trader named Simon Fraser pushed through the mountains of the West and followed a wild, canyon-choked river all the way to the Pacific, nearly dying several times on the way. Today, that river carries his surname across British Columbia, which means Fraser is one of the very few names on this list you can see from space. A Highland clan name written in water across an entire province. If your name is Fraser and your family story says Canada, there is a fair chance it begins with a soldier who looked at the country he had just helped conquer and decided he would rather just live in it. Number 14, Pike. Now we go somewhere most surname videos forget, Newfoundland. Because here's the fact that rearranges the map. The oldest continuously used English surnames in Canada are not in Toronto or Halifax. They are in the fishing coves of Newfoundland, where English families were living, fishing and burying their dead decades before most of the mainland saw a permanent English settler. Pike is one of those names. It appears in the island's early records and it has never left, generation after generation of the same families working the same shore. In some Newfoundland communities, the surnames in the modern phone listings match the surnames in records from the 1600s almost line for line. That is not immigration, that is permanence. And think about what that permanence survived. The cod fishery, collapsing and recovering and collapsing again. Whole outport villages being closed and resettled in the 20th century, families floating their actual houses across the bays to new coves. The houses moved. The names did not change. A Pike who left a resettled village was still a Pike on the new shore, and the graveyards they left behind still say so. In most of North America, 400 years erases a family from the map. In Newfoundland, 400 years just makes you a local. Number 13, Dawe. Same island, same astonishing continuity. In 1610, an English merchant named John Guy planted a colony at a place called Cupid's in Conception Bay, the first serious attempt at year-round English settlement in what is now Canada. The colony struggled as they all did. But mark what happened there. By some accounts, the first English child born in what is now Canada was born at Cupid's in 1613. in a plantation of a few dozen people clinging to a rocky bay. While empires argued over the continent on paper, somebody in Conception Bay was already rocking a Canadian-born baby with an English surname. The colony itself faded, but the families that trickled into those bays afterward held on, and names recorded among Newfoundland's early planter families, Dawe among them, are still common in those same bays today. Walk a cemetery in Conception Bay and then read the local hockey team's roster. 400 years, same names. If your surname is Dawe or Pike or Butler and your people are from Newfoundland, your Canadian roots may outdate almost everyone else's in the country, and hardly anyone has ever told you that. Number 12. Boudreau. Now to the other founding shore, Acadia. French families began settling the coasts of what is now Nova Scotia and New Brunswick in the 1630s and 40s, and they did something no one else on the continent was doing. Instead of clearing forest, they walled out the sea. They built earthen dikes with wooden valves, aboiteaux, that drained the salt marshes of the Bay of Fundy, home of the highest tides on the planet, and turned them into some of the richest farmland in North America. A people that farms below sea level learns to depend on its neighbors completely, and that dependence shows in the records, a tight, interwoven web of the same surnames, marrying each other for a century. Boudreau is one of the oldest of them, present in Acadian records from the earliest generations. And every Acadian name on this list carries the same scar. In 1755, the British deported the Acadians, thousands of them, scattering families from Massachusetts to Louisiana. The name Boudreau survived the deportation in both directions. It came back to the Maritimes with the families who returned, and it went south with the ones who could not, where Louisiana softened it into Boudreau. Same family, one vowel of difference, an ocean of history. Number 11. Melanson. Another Acadian founder with a twist historians still argue about. The Melanson brothers appear in Acadia in the 1650s, and their name has a puzzle inside it. It does not look convincingly French. Several researchers trace the family's origins to England or Scotland, a Protestant family that turned French and Catholic on Acadian soil. If that is right, one of the oldest French names in Canada started out as neither French nor Catholic, which tells you something true about the 17th century. The border between peoples was thinner than the textbooks make it. Today, Melanson is one of the signature surnames of Acadian identity, carried by the descendants of people who survived the deportation and came home to rebuild on the same tides. Number 10. LeBlanc, the king of Acadian surnames. From one settler, Daniel LeBlanc, who appears in the records of Port Royal in the 1650s, came a family so prolific that by the deportation a century later, LeBlancs made up a startling share of the entire Acadian population, and today LeBlanc is among the most common surnames in New Brunswick, full stop. Hold that for a second because it means something brutal about 1755. When the transport ships were loaded, families were sometimes split between vessels bound for different colonies, and for a family the size of the LeBlancs, the deportation was not one tragedy. It was hundreds of separate ones, brothers landing in Massachusetts while sisters landed in Georgia, spending years, sometimes decades, walking and sailing and writing letters to find each other again. Some never did. The ones who made it back to the Maritimes rebuilt on poorer land than the farms they had lost, and kept the name anyway. The deportation scattered them everywhere, and here the name did something surnames do under pressure. It translated. In Louisiana, it stayed LeBlanc. In New England, immigration clerks and mill towns turned many LeBlancs into Whites, the same family wearing an English name like a work uniform. If your name is White and your grandmother's kitchen had a French accent, you may be a LeBlanc with the paint changed. Number 9. Boucher. In 1635, a boy of about 13 named Pierre Boucher stepped off a ship into a colony that could still fit its entire European population into one church. He grew up with the country, soldier, interpreter, governor of Trois-Rivières, author of the first book written by a resident describing Canada to the French, and eventually the first Canadian settler raised in the colony to be ennobled by the king. He lived past 80, and his descendants are legion through the Boucher name and through the towns, Boucherville among them, that carry it for him. And notice the pattern he starts, because you will see it again in the top 5. In Old Canada, the distance between nobody and founder was one lifetime. In France, a butcher's grandson had a ceiling over his head that no amount of talent could lift. In the colony, the same boy could learn the languages of the country, negotiate, govern, write, and end his life with a noble title and a town named after his family. The name means butcher, an ordinary trade name from France. What one boy did with it on this side of the ocean was anything but ordinary. Number 8. Langlois. Here is a small joke the 17th century left inside modern Canada. Langlois is French for the Englishman. It was the nickname French villages gave to that one family with English roots, and it hardened into a surname centuries before Canada. Noel Langlois, a ship's pilot, arrived on the St. Lawrence in 1634, married, and produced one of the colony's founding families. So today, thousands of proudly French-speaking Quebecers carry a surname that literally announces English ancestry from some forgotten medieval village. Names are honest that way. They remember what families forget. Number 7. Roy. Roy means king, and no, the Roys of Canada do not descend from royalty, and this channel will not pretend otherwise. In France, Roy was a nickname. The man who played the king in the village festival, the winner of an archery contest crowned king for a day. Sometimes pure irony aimed at a man with grand manners and no money. Several unrelated Roys crossed to New France in the 1600s, and the name multiplied until it became one of the most common surnames in Quebec, which produces a very Canadian truth. A country that never crowned a king of its own is quietly full of them, in every arena and on every jersey, one nickname deep. And here is the trap that hides this name from its own descendants. When Roy families moved into English Canada or crossed into New England for factory work, clerks and school teachers often did the obvious thing. They translated it. Roy became king. Boucher became butcher. Boisvert became Greenwood. So there are families today named King and Butcher and Greenwood who have no idea their paper trail runs straight back to a St. Lawrence parish register in the 1600s. If your old family Bible has an English name on one page and a French one on the page before, you are not looking at a mistake. You are looking at a border crossing. And while we are inside the machinery of names, here is the promise from the beginning of the video. The system that gave thousands of Canadian families two surnames at once. In New France, especially among soldiers and early settlers, a man often carried his family name plus a second name called a dit name from the French word for said, or called Jean Roy de la Pensée. A soldier might take his regiment's nickname, a farmer might take the name of his home village in France. Sometimes it described the man himself. For generations, both names traveled together through the registers, and then somewhere in the 1800s, each branch of the family quietly chose one and dropped the other. Which means this, and it surprises people every single time. There are pairs of Canadian families today with completely different surnames who are the same family. One branch kept the original, the other kept the nickname. Two names, one bloodline, and most of the descendants have no idea the other half exists until a genealogist or a DNA test introduces them. If your French-Canadian line seems to hit a wall in the records, this is very often the wall. Your ancestors did not disappear. They are filed under their other name. Number 6. Côté. Jean Côté arrived by 1635, one of the earliest settler families of Quebec, and his descendants took the name from a handful of households to one of the province's most common surnames, spread today across Canada and deep into New England. The name itself likely just described where a family lived, on a slope, a coast, a side. Which is fitting, because that is what the Côté did for 4 centuries. They lived alongside the whole story, farm by farm, parish register by parish register, one of those names that never once led the history books and never once left them either. And now, stop the countdown. Because none of the last 5 names, and honestly none of the last 10, would exist at the scale they do without an event almost nobody outside Quebec has heard of. In the 1660s, New France had a fatal problem. It was a colony of men. Fur traders, soldiers, farmhands, and almost no families forming. So between 1663 and 1673, the King of France sponsored roughly 770 young women, most of them poor, many orphans, to cross the Atlantic with a royal dowry and marry into the colony. They were called les filles du roi, the king's daughters. And clear one slander off the table right now because it followed these women for centuries. They were not what the old jokes implied. The records show ordinary young women, recruited from orphanages and struggling families, vetted, chaperoned, and given a trousseau and a royal dowry because France understood that a colony without wives is a work camp with an expiry date. Here's the detail that tells you who really held the power. On arrival, the choosing went both ways. A woman could interview a suitor, ask about his cabin, his land, his debts, and refuse him. Some refused several. In 17th century France, a poor orphan girl had almost no say in her own marriage. On the St. Lawrence, suddenly, she was the scarcest and most valuable person in the colony, and the men knew it. They stepped off ships into a frozen frontier, chose husbands sometimes within weeks, and had on average enormous families. Do the arithmetic across 3.5 centuries and you reach the estimate demographers now repeat with a straight face. The majority of the millions of French Canadians alive today and their cousins across New England and Louisiana descend from at least one of those 770 women. Most descend from several, almost every name in the back half of this video multiplied through their daughters. Canada likes to tell its history as explorers and railways. The honest version includes this: a country seeded deliberately by 770 determined women with royal luggage money. If your family is old Quebec, they are your grandmothers, full stop. And if this is the kind of history you came for, take 1 second and subscribe, because this channel digs up the family-sized history the textbooks skip. One more thing before the top 5, because at this point in the video somebody is always asking, fine, but how would I actually check my own name? Here is the quiet advantage Canadians have over almost everyone else on Earth. The Catholic parishes of Quebec recorded every baptism, marriage, and burial in duplicate for over 3 centuries, and those registers survived. Genealogists consider French Canada one of the best documented founding populations in the world. Researchers have linked millions of those old records into family lines that can carry an ordinary person from a modern kitchen table back to a stone church in the 1600s, name by name, without a single guess. People pay fortunes chasing thinner paper trails in Europe. If your family is old Quebec or Acadia, the trail is not just there. It is paved. Now, the top 5. Number 5. Martin. Martin is one of the most common surnames in the Western world, so hear the specific Canadian story because it is hiding in plain sight. Abraham Martin, nicknamed L'Écossais, the Scot, was among the very first settlers on the St. Lawrence, holding land at Quebec by the 1620s. He was a river pilot, a fisherman, by some accounts a difficult man, and he owned a stretch of high pasture above the town. A century and a half after his death, in 1759, 2 empires fought a 15-minute battle on that old pasture, and the fate of North America flipped. We call it the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. That is him. The most famous piece of ground in Canadian history is literally one early settler's field still wearing his first name. Sit with how strange that is. Both commanding generals died of their wounds from that morning, Wolfe on the field, Montcalm before the next dawn. Empires redrew the map of the world because of 15 minutes on that grass. And the grass itself still answers to a river pilot who had been dead for over a century. A man whose main recorded concerns were boats, cows, and lawsuits. History kept the farmer's name and made the generals share it. His surname, meanwhile, went on multiplying quietly into the millions. You can carry the name Martin your whole life and never learn that another Martin's back 40 decided which language this video would be in. Number 4. Couillard. In 1621, a ship's carpenter named Guillaume Couillard married a teenager named Guillemette Hebert in a tiny wooden settlement called Quebec. Hold that bride's surname, it is the top of this list. That wedding, one of the first recorded in Canada between settlers, founded what is arguably the longest continuously documented family line in the country. Baptism by baptism, marriage by marriage, 4 centuries of Couillards written into the registers without a break. Guillaume himself was the first man to use a plough in Canada and was ennobled for a lifetime of quietly essential work. There are families in Europe that cannot document 4 unbroken centuries. This one did it in a colony that was starving half the time. If your name is Couillard, you are not descended from history, you are the paperwork. Number 3. Tremblay. Now the fact that sounds invented and is not. Tremblay is the most common surname in Quebec, tens upon tens of thousands of people, entire pages of directories, a name so dominant it became shorthand for the average Quebecer, the way Smith works in English. Politicians named Tremblay. Hockey players named Tremblay. In some towns there are so many that people fall back on the old rural trick of attaching the father's name just to tell them apart, and virtually every one of them traces back to one man. Pierre Tremblay, a laborer from the Perche region of France, landed around 1647, married Ozana Con, a settler's daughter, and farmed. That is the whole story. No title, no battle, no book. Just 12 children in a cold country, and their children and theirs, compounding for nearly 4 centuries until one couple's household outnumbered armies. Genealogists call it the founder effect, and Quebec is one of the clearest laboratories of it on Earth. A small founding population, closed registers, big families, and suddenly geneticists can trace certain traits across the province back to specific 17th century couples by name. Scientists study Quebec families the way astronomers study clean skies. I call it the best answer ever given to the question of what one ordinary family is worth. 2 people, 1 farm, and today their name is functionally the name of a province. Number 2. Gagnon. Three brothers, Mathurin, Jean, and Pierre Gagnon, reached New France around 1640 and did something almost boring. They opened a store. Merchants and farmers, steady, prosperous, fertile. From those three households, Gagnon grew into one of the most common surnames in Quebec and among the most common French surnames in all of North America. And the second engine of that spread came 2 centuries later in the 1800s, when Quebec's farms ran out of land for all those enormous families and hundreds of thousands of French Canadians walked south to the textile mills of New England. Entire mill towns in Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts filled up with Gagnons and Côtés and Roys, whole French-speaking neighborhoods called Little Canadas, which is why so many people watching this from the United States carry a name from this list without a single relative left in Quebec. The name likely comes from an old French word for a guard dog, and it is hard to build a better metaphor honestly. A name that arrived, planted itself at the door of the new country, and simply never moved again. And number 1. Hebert, 1617. 10 years after Jamestown, 3 years before the Mayflower. A Paris apothecary named Louis Hebert, who had already tasted the New World in the doomed early ventures in Acadia, made a decision his neighbors must have thought insane. He sold his house near the Louvre and moved his wife, Marie Rollet, and their 3 children to Quebec, a fort of a few dozen souls at the edge of the known world. Understand what the colony was getting. Not a soldier, not a nobleman chasing furs, but a man of medicine and plants, the closest thing to a doctor for hundreds of miles, and the first person to prove that a European family could actually feed itself from Canadian soil rather than from the hold of a supply ship. When the ships came late, and they always came late, Hebert's garden was the difference between a hungry winter and a fatal one. He was the first settler to support his family from Canadian soil, the colony's first farmer, and its only medicine man, and when he died after a fall in 1627, the colony he fed was still barely a village. His wife Marie stayed. In 1629, when an English fleet took Quebec and nearly every French colonist sailed home in defeat, the widow Marie Rollet and her family were among the very few who remained, keeping the farm alive under occupation until France got its colony back 3 years later. Read that again. For a stretch of time, the French presence in Canada was more or less one determined widow, her children, and a field. Through starvation, through occupation, through everything, she stayed, taught, farmed, and raised the children whose marriages, including that Couillard wedding at number 4, seeded the entire colony. 4 centuries later, Hebert is still everywhere, on mailboxes in Quebec, on ballots in Louisiana, on jerseys and storefronts and war memorials. The oldest continuously carried settler surname in Canada belongs, fittingly, not to a general or a governor, but to a pharmacist with a plow and to the woman who refused to abandon the field. And that is the real shape of this list, not 15 names of the powerful, 15 names of the persistent. Canada is a young country wearing very old names, and the oldest of them belong to bakers of bread and pilots of rivers and mothers of 12, people whose entire monument is the fact that you just heard their name and someone watching this video is signing it on a form today. Because that is what a surname actually is. When you strip away the heraldry and the souvenir shop coats of arms, it is the only inheritance that every single generation manages to pass on. Farms get sold. Fortunes evaporate. Letters burn. But 400 years of Canadian winters could not kill a 2-syllable word, and tonight, somewhere between St. John's and Vancouver, a nurse is finishing a shift, a kid is signing a hockey roster, and a new baby is being registered under a name that stepped off a wooden ship before Canada was even an idea. So now the part I genuinely wait for. Is one of these 15 names yours, or in your family tree? Is your name one of the old Newfoundland ones, or Acadian, or Old Quebec, and where are you watching from? Because I know from the comments that the old names are scattered from Vancouver to Louisiana to New England. Tell me your surname story below. I read every single comment, and the name that gets mentioned the most becomes its own full video. Subscribe if this is your kind of history, because next time we cross to the names that came later and changed everything anyway, the Irish names that famine rode across Canada, and why half of them are hiding an extra letter. See you there.